A $75 shoplifted bench vise. That's all it took to expose a heavily fortified underground serial killer bunker. On Sunday, June 2, 1985, a young man wearing a parka walked into a South San Francisco hardware store. He slid a heavy metal vise under his coat and walked out the front door. He had no idea an off-duty police officer named John Callis was watching. Callis rushed outside and spotted the thief next to a tan Honda Prelude. Callis called out to him, but the young man panicked and bolted. Callis walked up to the Honda and looked inside. There in the back seat was the stolen vise, its $75 price tag still attached. He took the stolen merchandise and brought it back to the hardware store, where a bearded man with a raspy voice approached him. He smiled and politely offered to pay for his runaway friend's mistake. It was too late for that. Officer Daniel Wright pulled into the parking lot and Callis pointed out the Honda. Wright ran the license plate and the dispatcher's result made absolutely no sense. The plates belonged to a Buick, registered to a Lonnie Bond. Wright popped the trunk and found a heavy backpack and a gun case. Inside the case was a semi-automatic Sturm Ruger .22 caliber handgun fitted with an illegal silencer. The bearded man strolled out of the store and approached Wright. He smiled again. He claimed everything was a simple misunderstanding. He gave his name as Robin Scott Stapley. Wright didn't buy a single word of it. He slapped cuffs on the man and took him to the station. At the precinct, Wright performed a more thorough search of the Honda. He found a high-voltage stun gun. He also found Polaroid photographs of a young family, a man, a woman, and a baby. When he ran the car's vehicle identification number, he found it was registered to a Paul Cosner. Paul had been reported missing. This was no longer a simple shoplifting case. Inside the interrogation room, the bearded man looked nervous. He asked for a cup of water and a notepad. He confessed his real name was Leonard Thomas Lake. His friend who ran was Charles Chitat Eng. He picked up a pencil and scribbled on the paper, "Dear Lynn, I love you. I forgive you. Freedom is better than all else. I'm sorry for all of the trouble." Before the detectives could even read the note, Lake reached under his collar. He pulled out a tiny hidden capsule and swallowed it. Seconds later, he was thrashing violently on the floor, thick foam bubbling from his mouth. Moments later, he was dead. The police were baffled. Why had a seemingly polite, apologetic man just taken a cyanide pill in front of them? They looked for answers in the Honda. Forensic chemicals sprayed on the car's passenger seat revealed traces of blood that had been wiped clean. There also appeared to be a bullet hole in the roof. They searched the glove box and they found a photograph of Leonard Lake posing with a young topless woman. At first, investigators assumed they had stumbled into a violent drug trafficking ring. They were wrong. A hardware store shoplifter had just accidentally handed the police the keys to a human slaughterhouse. The police have no idea what they're dealing with yet, but at least they had a lead. A utility bill in the car lists an isolated address deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Detectives drive 200 miles to Wilseyville in Calaveras County. They follow a dirt road and spot a wooden compound perched on the hillside. They park and they make their way to a concrete building next to the cabin. It looks like a bunker. Cars are parked nearby, but there is no sign of their owners. The dead man's ex-wife, Clara Lynn Ballas, better known as Cricket, owns the land. She accompanies the police. She tells them the suspect built a shelter out here to survive the impending nuclear apocalypse. They approach a small two-bedroom wooden cabin. One of the detectives runs his hands over the doorframe. They still suspect Leonard might be a trafficker, and it is the kind of place where people might stash illegal substances. The detective finds capsules, ones that have been hand-filled and taped closed. He doesn't know it, but they contain cyanide. In the first bedroom, they discover holes drilled into the bedpost in the floor. Looking in a drawer, they find deadbolts that fit perfectly within the holes. The detectives have a bad feeling immediately. There's a typewriter on a desk and some strange stickers with the words "shred" and "to be destroyed" printed on them. In the living room, there's a well-used recliner, a bookshelf, and a Sony videocassette recorder. The serial number links back to a case of a missing family, the Dubbs, Harvey, Deborah, and their baby son, the family from the photograph in the car. Suddenly, Cricket announces the detectives have seen enough, they need to go. But the detectives will return soon with a search warrant. This time their focus is the bunker. Cricket had told them it was a shelter Leonard had built for when the apocalypse came. But when they search it, they can see it's obviously more than that. Much more. There are 3 rooms, 2 of which are tiny and hidden behind a false door. The detectives find a copy of the book The Collector by John Fowles, a story about a butterfly collector who becomes obsessed with a woman. He kidnaps her and keeps her prisoner in a cellar as he tries to make her love him. Her name is Miranda Gray. Miranda. a name that will soon give the detectives nightmares. One room is a cell. It's about 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. It looks as though someone tried to break the locks from the inside. There's a foam mattress for a bed, a shelf, a place for food and clothes, a bucket in the corner serving as a toilet. There's also a one-way mirror so you can see inside the cell from the other room. Perhaps worst of all is the set of rules stuck to the cell wall. I must service my master. I must be clean. I must never look my master in the eye. It went on like this, rules on silence, eating, obedience, and the last one, I must understand that any disobedience, any pain, trouble, or annoyance caused by me to my master will be grounds for punishment. And when a team arrives and starts digging outside of the cabin, they find more evidence that something terrible happened here. They find 5-gallon buckets buried in the ground, one that contains the IDs of missing people, another containing Leonard's journals he'd kept between 1983 and 1984. There are also 2 videotapes titled M Ladies. The last 2 entries in the journal are under the names Brenda and Kathy. It'll later be confirmed that they are Brenda O'Connor, 19 of San Diego, and Kathleen Allen, 18 of Milpitas, Santa Clara County. One of the detectives slips the tape into the VCR. Kathleen appears on the screen. Leonard Lake is filming while shouting at her as she's forced to massage the man who ran from the store that day. They now know for certain he is Charles Eng, known to friends as Charlie. The screen goes fuzzy. Then another woman appears. It's Brenda. She's wearing a red sweater with blue jeans. Handcuffs are around her wrists. Her eyes are puffy like she's been crying. She looks at Leonard and asks, "Did you guys kill them?" She means her boyfriend, Lonnie Bond, and their friend, Robin Scott Stapley. They all live together in a cabin nearby, the 3 of them and their baby, Lonnie Jr. She'll do anything they want, she says, just please don't hurt her baby. Leonard tells her he and Charlie are going to keep her for a while. They're going to make her suffer. He starts ripping off her sweater. Charlie steps in with a large knife and cuts off the rest. She starts to cry. Charles shrugs. We're pretty cold-hearted, so to speak. Seems like he's really enjoying this, and it is just the start. It goes on and on. The torment, the psychological damage. The last thing before the video stops is Leonard saying, "Take care of her now, Charlie." The detectives are stunned. What happened to these women? What happened to Lonnie Sr. and Stapley, the baby? A detective slips another cassette into the VCR. It's labeled Taboo. At first it looks like a regular movie, but then partway through there's a glitch. He rewinds it and is sure he sees 2 bodies in sleeping bags in a wheelbarrow, but they only catch it when the tape is being rewound. The excavations outside the property begin. Dogs sniff for buried humans. One of them, tail wagging, finds a bone. Some human flesh is still attached. They dig up human spines and teeth. They find 2 people in sleeping bags, 2 men, with ball gags in their rotted mouths, both of them shot in the head. They find wallets, glasses, clothing, handcuffs, and enough bone fragments to suggest this is a graveyard. Maybe 25 victims in total, but it's impossible to tell right now. The police had just unearthed a graveyard. They needed to know why it existed. Leonard provided the exact answer on a videotape. He sat in a recliner looking directly into the lens and laid out his master plan. I'm a realist. I'm 38 years old, a bit chubby, not much hair, and losing what I have. He explains that he doesn't have money or power and that he is very attracted to women who seem to have no interest in him. He's only interested in young women, ideally 18 to 22, and small so he can feel dominant. He wanted to lock a woman in a concrete box, use her when he was bored, and put her away. He literally compared his ideal victim to a damaged toy returning to its box. He smiled at the camera and admitted his plan was blatantly sexist and highly illegal. He waved his hand. He said it violated human rights and, quote, blah, blah, blah. He called his plan the Miranda Project. He named it after the captive woman in a psychological thriller called The Collector. It was the only book he had read. He read it obsessively until fiction became an instruction manual. Detectives looked at this tape and expected to find a tactical mastermind. They found a pathetic fraud whose delusions and fantasies went back years. Leonard bragged to everyone that he was a hardened combat veteran who killed people in Vietnam. It was a complete lie. He spent his deployment on base as a radar technician. A military psychologist diagnosed him with impending schizophrenia and hysterical neurosis. After he was medically discharged in 1971, he spent time in a psychiatric facility. To understand Leonard, detectives needed to speak to her. His wife, from the time, Karen, told detectives she'd stood by him at first, but as time went on, he became paranoid and more violent. The only time he seemed relaxed was when he was reading. They had lots of books in the house, but he only read one, over and over again, The Collector. And Karen finally demanded a divorce. The self-proclaimed tough guy broke down crying, and then he broke into her apartment and poured acid all over her dresses. He called these petty tantrums operations, ops, as though he was still in the military. After the divorce, he wrote in his journal, "If you love something, let it go. If it doesn't come back, hunt it down and kill it." For detectives, a fuller picture of Leonard was starting to emerge. Leonard was paranoid and perverted, no doubt, but his obsession was control. After Karen, these fantasies stayed with him, but he lacked the confidence to do what he really wanted until he met his second wife, Cricket. Cricket actually encouraged his sick delusions. She laughed with him about capturing a future slave, but he still didn't dare to actually go through with it. He needed someone to execute the violence he was too scared to commit, a true accomplice. He found one in Charles Ang. Charlie, as he preferred to go by, was an actual survivalist, a former Marine who stole heavy weaponry from a military armory in Hawaii and escaped custody. He was a fugitive on the run. Leonard took him in, and Charlie became the lethal weapon Leonard always wanted. Together, they began to stockpile an arsenal: assault rifles, tear gas, grenades. But their partnership hit a massive wall in April 1982 when the FBI raided their compound. Helicopters swarmed the property. Charlie was dragged onto a military plane in handcuffs. Leonard stared down 17 felony counts. He was facing years in prison, and he'd always told himself cyanide was better than being locked up. But he wasn't ready for that plan yet, so instead he ran. He became a fugitive. Cricket had grown tired of Leonard's perversions and was moving out. If he needed a place to hide and had nowhere to go, he could use her father's cabin out in the Sierra Nevada foothills near Wilseyville. He was now completely off the grid, and he was finally ready for the Miranda project to become more than just a fantasy. It was time to start digging. But first, this is our new channel for all things true crime. If you want more cases this dark, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps us keep making videos like this. And let us know in the comments who you want us to cover next. Building a fortified underground dungeon was wildly expensive. Leonard was a fugitive. He was hiding in the woods. He could not walk into a bank for a loan. He needed massive amounts of untraceable cash to buy concrete, heavy deadbolts, and video equipment. He couldn't get a regular job, so he made money selling drugs. He used false names and moved around a lot, occasionally stealing. His life from here on was all about ops. Stealing was an op. Selling weed was an op. Getting women to pose for him was an op. And killing people, those were ops too. And the next op would involve his own family. His younger brother Donald had survived being struck by a train as a child. The brutal physical impact left him with severe brain damage. He required constant medical care and lived with their mother well into adulthood. A normal human looks at Donald and sees a tragic survivor. Leonard looked at his profoundly injured brother and saw a parasite. He saw a leech draining their mother's cash, so he erased him. After murdering his disabled brother, he faked a letter from Donald to their mom. "Dear Mom, I've gone to live with drug dealers in Nevada." He immediately began cashing in on his dead brother's monthly government disability checks. He even started using his dead brother's ID, posing as him despite weighing significantly more than his brother and wearing a cheap wig to cover up his baldness. But stolen disability checks barely covered the cost of concrete. He needed a bigger payout. So he targeted the next closest person to him, a man who had been the best man at his own wedding, Charles Gunner. Charles was overweight and also collecting welfare. Leonard secretly despised him. He wrote in his diary that Charles made him sick. He coldly named his murder plot Operation Fish because he viewed his supposed best friend as a beached whale. His first attempt failed. Leonard spiked his best friend's food with cyanide, but Charles miraculously refused to eat it. According to Leonard's journal, Charles turned down the food offered to him for what must have been the first time in his life. That didn't stop Leonard. He simply lured Charles on a road trip to Vegas. On May 24, 1983, he wrote in his diary, "Phase 1 of Fish complete, finally." A few days later, Leonard got in touch with Charles's babysitter. He told her Charles had met a girl there and he wouldn't be returning home for the foreseeable future, so he'd be picking up the children. Charles never came back. Leonard murdered his best friend, and then he consumed the man's entire life. He stole his car, his house, his kids, even his name. He started introducing himself to strangers as Charles Gunner. Charles's daughters didn't seem to miss their father. Leonard was nicer to them than their father had been, and Leonard didn't seem to think about hurting them. They were too close to his life to ever become Miranda's. That plan never left his mind, though. A diary entry said he'd watched a movie version of the book he cherished, The Collector. He wrote, "Ah, The Collector. Has it really been nearly 20 years I've carried this fantasy?" He talked about my lovely little prisoner of the future and how guys like him had been compensating for our inabilities since the dawn of history. After stealing his friend's life, he now had the money he needed. He had to start the Miranda Project. Leonard mailed photographs of the finished dungeon to Charles Eng. Charlie was still sitting in a military prison at Fort Leavenworth. He showed the pictures to the other inmates, and he bragged that as soon as he got out, he and his partner were going to start hunting. The inmates thought he was lying. They were completely wrong. Charlie Eng walked out of a military prison in June 1984. He immediately headed to California to reunite with Leonard. Leonard's bunker was almost ready, packed with dried food, medicine, clothes, everything he'd need for the end of the world. Life was good. Operation Miranda was set to go. He just had to choose the right kind of slave. But they had a massive logistical problem. If they were going to capture women and document their psychological torture, they needed high-end video equipment. They also needed untraceable vehicles to transport their victims deep into the mountains. But they were completely broke. Buying these items was impossible, so they hunted. Over the next few months, Leonard and Charlie turned Northern California into their personal supply closet. They treated human beings entirely as collateral damage. They shot and killed a local DJ and his roommate. They murdered a man just to steal his van. They even vanished a local weed dealer simply because Leonard wanted his refrigerator. Their most horrific supply run happened in July. Harvey Dubbs was a 29-year-old father living in San Francisco. He owned a massive collection of expensive high-tech video gear. He made the fatal mistake of listing it for sale in the classifieds. His wife Deborah called a friend one evening. She said a prospective buyer was coming over to look at the electronics. The doorbell rang. Deborah hung up the phone. The entire family vanished off the face of the earth. The next day, a friend arrived at the apartment. The front door was swinging wide open. Deborah's keys were still dangling in the lock. The wooden shelves holding Harvey's expensive cameras and VCRs were completely stripped bare. That was the exact same VCR police would later find hooked up inside the Wilseyville bunker. A downstairs neighbor reported seeing a short man with thick glasses carrying a massive heavy bag out of the building. He climbed into a waiting getaway car driven by an overweight balding man. The car screeched away. Leonard finally had his film studio, but the supply run was not over. They had the cameras. Now they needed a reliable car. A 39-year-old man named Paul Cosner placed an innocent advertisement in the local newspaper. He was trying to sell his used 1980 Honda Prelude. He drove off to meet a prospective buyer. He never came home. Leonard killed him for his car and swapped the license plate. It would become Leonard and Charlie's primary hunting vehicle, the same one that was parked outside of the hardware store the day Leonard swallowed cyanide. The dungeon was built, the cameras were rolling, the transport vehicle was secured. They still needed cash though, so Charlie took a grueling day job at a local moving company in San Francisco. Charlie terrified his co-workers. He paced around the warehouse muttering violent, rhyming phrases under his breath. He would say, "No gun, no fun." He would repeat, "No kill, no thrill." He constantly invited his colleagues up to a remote cabin in the woods for the weekend. Most of them possessed the survival instinct to say no. Charlie did have one friend at work though, 23-year-old Cliff Peranto. Cliff had actually helped him get the job. They would argue about football all day as they moved heavy boxes. Charlie liked the work. He seemed to like Cliff too. But one day they argued, and Cliff screamed at Charlie, "I never should have gotten you this job." Not long after, Cliff vanished. His motorcycle disappeared from his driveway. Weeks later, the moving company received a bizarre typed resignation letter claiming Cliff had suddenly moved away for a new girl. The envelope was postmarked from a tiny mountain town called Wilseyville. Then it happened again. A 25-year-old co-worker named Jeffrey Dean Gerald vanished. His roommate returned to their apartment and found the front door swinging wide open. The bedsheets were completely stripped from the mattress. Jeffrey had told a friend he was doing some under-the-table moving work for Charlie that afternoon. He never came home. Charlie was treating the moving business like a private hunting preserve. He lured men directly into Leonard's slaughterhouse to practice killing and steal their vehicles. The only thing missing for Project Miranda was the slaves, and their master plan required women. Charlie reached out to an old Marine buddy, Michael Sean Carroll. Michael and his 18-year-old girlfriend Kathy were staying in a hotel. Charlie invited Michael to the cabin and never came back. The next day, Kathy was working her shift at a grocery store. She suddenly told her boss she had an emergency and had to leave immediately. She walked outside and climbed into a car driven by an overweight balding man. The trap snapped shut. Leonard and Charlie finally had their Miranda. This brings everything back to the stolen Honda parked outside the hardware store. The vehicle identification number belonging to the murdered man, Paul Cosner. But the license plates belonged to a 27-year-old father named Lonnie. So who was Lonnie? He was Leonard's brand new neighbor. Lonnie had just moved his girlfriend, Brenda, and their infant son and a roommate into a secluded mountain cabin. They wanted to live peacefully off the grid. They thought they had found a mountain paradise. They had no idea they moved in directly next door to a human slaughterhouse. Leonard demanded total isolation. He viewed the mountain as his private domain. He watched the young family from the trees and immediately viewed Brenda as his next target. A few days later, Leonard walked into a local medical clinic. He had a fresh gunshot wound straight through his hand. He claimed it was a clumsy accident. The physical evidence suggested something much darker. Someone in that neighboring cabin fought for their lives and they lost. Leonard and Charlie slaughtered the two men and got rid of the infant boy. They dragged 20-year-old Brenda and 18-year-old Kathy into the concrete bunker. The reality was they would now be starring in videos for Operation Miranda. Leonard pressed record on his stolen VCR. The footage police eventually uncovered was pure psychological terror. Leonard documented his abuse control over the concrete cell. He lectured the terrified women on total obedience. He used a German shepherd to intimidate them. He forced Kathy to write a fake letter to her employer, claiming she had simply moved away to Lake Tahoe. He told her, "When I tell you to do things, I tell you things that are very important to me, that I want you to do." There was no question. Leonard was in complete control. After photographing Kathy half-naked, he tossed her some warm clothes. The last words on the tape are, "Okay, I just want you to know that I'm giving this stuff to you under protest. Not that we care, mind you." This is the last time Kathy was seen alive. By June of 1985, the true scale of the horror was staggering. At least 10 men were dead. 4 women were missing. 2 babies were gone. The underground cage was operating at peak efficiency. They just needed more building materials to expand. So Leonard and Charlie drove the stolen Honda to a hardware store in South San Francisco. A man wearing a heavy parka walked inside. He slid a metal vise under his coat, and not long after, Leonard was lying dead on the interrogation room floor. At the bunker, detectives unearthed 40 pounds of crushed human bone. They found sleeping bags stuffed with remains. They had an idea of what Leonard had done. He was dead, though, and he couldn't answer any more questions. To understand the full, terrifying scope of the slaughter, they needed the accomplice. But Charles Ng was a ghost. An international manhunt exploded across the globe. 1 month later, his luck ran out. A security guard in a Canadian department store caught him shoplifting cans of food. The guard followed Charlie as he walked out. After he and another guard tried to empty Charlie's bag, they all got into a scuffle. Charlie fought like a cornered animal. He bit the guards. He clawed at their faces. He pulled a stolen handgun and fired 2 shots, blowing a hole through a guard's hand. They finally wrestled him to the concrete and snapped the handcuffs shut. Inside his bag, police found the murdered neighbor's 35mm camera. They also found a towel belonging to his vanished co-worker Cliff. Once he was in custody, Charlie immediately deployed a terrifying psychological defense. He admitted that he knew Leonard Lake and that they had robbed people together. He even confessed to shooting at Paul Cosner, the owner of the Honda, but he claimed he missed and hit the roof. It was Leonard who shot him dead. Going even further, he claimed to help tie people up, going as far as admitting that he strapped a ball gag onto Lonnie Bond. He was deeply involved, sure, but was he a murderer? Charlie claimed that he was just a terrified helper, a thief, an abuser, but not a killer. Leonard was the sole butcher. But when the detectives asked about the murders, Charlie pointed the finger directly at the dead man. He swore he had no idea what happened to the Dubs family. He admitted to luring his co-workers to the cabin, but insisted Leonard was the sole butcher. Charlie claimed he was just a terrified helper trapped in Leonard's web. There was barely any physical evidence placing him at the bunker. Forensics had only found a single fingerprint. It looked like Charlie was inches away from manipulating his way out of a murder charge. Then his cellmate handed over the drawings. While sitting in prison, Charlie grew bored. He started sketching cartoons of the Wilseyville bunker. He drew over 150 detailed, horrific comic strips of the women they captured. He drew Kathy bound in the cell, her eyes wide with terror. He drew Leonard wielding a whip. He scrawled his sick warehouse rhymes across the concrete walls. No gun, no fun. No kill, no thrill. He He even sketched a fictional remains-claiming station he drew himself, handing out plastic bags of human body parts to grieving families. He told his lawyers the drawings were just dark satire. Charlie was extradited back to the United States to stand trial for murder. When Charlie finally stood trial in California, his defense team tried a desperate strategy. They claimed Charlie was a naive pawn. They pointed the finger directly at Leonard's ex-wife, Cricket. The diaries proved she helped recruit the victims, even writing, "We are all going to get into trouble for this." But prosecutors had already granted Cricket full immunity. Charlie was the one on trial. It was true that some of the murder counts against Charlie were not clear-cut. At times, he had been working full-time at a moving company while Leonard was carrying out his crimes 3 hours away in Wilseyville. The defense claimed the case was built on circumstantial evidence. No one could say they saw Charles Ng kill anyone. Then, the prosecution pressed play on the VCR. They forced the court to watch a terrified young mother beg for her baby's life. Charlie casually sliced off her clothing with a hunting knife. They listened to him stare at the weeping woman and coldly say, "You can cry like the rest of them." And then, there was the comics he sketched in the prison, the statements he made to fellow prisoners. There was no doubt he was a predator. After 3.5 months of grueling testimony, the courtroom fell entirely silent. The verdicts were read aloud. Charles Ng was convicted on 11 counts of first-degree murder. The man who chanted about dead babies was sentenced to death. Today, he sits on death row at a California medical facility. He is 65 years old, and if you ask him what happened in those woods, he will look you dead in the eye and repeat the exact same lie. He claims he never killed a single person. If you want us to cover more true crime stories like these, please be sure to like the video and subscribe. It really does help. Then go watch this video about an MI6 codebreaker who was found dead inside a locked North Face duffel bag. And the key to the lock, somehow it was inside the bag with him.